Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, today we got a special guest for you. His name is Adam Davis. So he is a speaker and a writer, and his books include, a lot of you guys have seen these, and you've definitely heard of one of them, I know for sure. But one is Behind the Badge, 365 Daily Devotions for Law Enforcement. So that is specifically for first responders. It's amazing. It is really a perennial bestseller and is recommended for a lot of people that are in law enforcement and leaders for them nationally. Also, Bulletproof Marriage. So a lot of you guys are in the Christian marriage circles and you've gone through stuff like that with your spouse. It's a 90-day devotional. This is one that he co-wrote with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who's an alumni of the podcast here. And then also he's a co-writer on Spiritual Combat, 30 Missions for Victorious Warfare. So this is a guy who is doing a lot of really incredible things in some unique areas. So as you'll hear in this podcast, in this episode that we're talking about, a lot of the things that he does, whether he's talking about how to be spiritually resilient or how to have a good marriage or how to operate as a law enforcement officer and be spiritual at the same time, the reason why he's doing these things is because he saw a gap that needed to be filled, and he's going to fill it. And that's, if nothing else, if you get nothing else from the podcast today, that's the message that I got from the time that I spent with him. I just wrapped up the call. He could not have been more accommodating or gracious with his time and with his ideas and what he was able to share. But the thing is a lot of us notice that there are gaps that need to be filled, and then we just expect someone else is going to do it. Right? And it can be something small like walking past a piece of trash, or it can be something large like something that you know you need to speak about with your wife or with your kid, and you just kind of leave it be. Or that business that you know you should launch because God's telling you, or that book that you should write, or whatever the situation is. But this is a guy that is just over and over, and he's doing it imperfectly, as he admits. But the thing about this guy is he's fueled by something that a lot of people have struggled with but haven't talked about. And so we're going to go in a lot of different places in this podcast, but we start off with stuff that he suffered, the abuse that he suffered at the hands of these heinous human beings early on in his life. And the thing about it, guys, is a lot of people that have that as part of their story doesn't end up well, right? They don't lean on God. They don't get the help that they need. And so that becomes the defining moment of their life, is the abuse that they suffered. But not for Adam Davis, not by a long shot. He took his lumps. He's definitely made his mistakes, and he's owned up to those things, and he's owned up to the hatred that grew in his heart for the people that wronged him as he grew up. But to hear how he speaks now, I mean, it gets me excited, it gets me jazzed up. And guys, I don't want to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Adam Davis, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Kyle, thank you so much for having me on, brother. I appreciate it.
Hey, we're so happy to have you on today. I know a lot of guys on this podcast are going to really appreciate some of the things that you have to say and the subject matters that we're going to be talking about. And we're going to go into a lot of different areas today. But the first thing I want to talk about, it is a little bit of a somber note, but it's a story of resilience for you in your life. And that's what we talk about all the time with this ministry, is making sure that you're mentally, physically, and spiritually resilient. And you were kind of forged in a crucible of some pretty bad circumstances early in your life. So I just wanted to kind of let you speak a little bit to that, because a lot of people have heard your story, but perhaps our audience hasn't quite heard that yet. But let's talk a little bit about your childhood and, unfortunately, the abuse that you suffered during that time period.
Yep. So as a young child, probably 5, 6 years old, my parents divorced. Mother had to start working different jobs, and never forget the day I saw my dad drive away with the UL trailer, and really, really wanted to be with my dad. But mother left me with somebody to quote unquote babysit us. And he started by discovering his dad's porn stash and all the porn videos and magazines and all this, and showing that to me. I'm 5 or 6 years old. This guy's significantly older, nobody that's related to me. And long story short, he starts to sodomize me and tries to normalize it, and I'm scared to death as a kid to talk about it. I held on that for a long time. Guilt, shame, fear, pain. 5-year-old kids aren't really trained on how to deal with that kind of stuff. And then again at 15, different situation, totally different dynamics. Caused me to have a sort of a skewed perspective of church, not really of God, but of church. When my mother dropped me off and left me and my sister with a 30-year-old married woman with kids, and wound up having a sexual relationship there at 15. and it's supposed to be like, this is God's will, that sort of thing. And I know you're supposed to make decisions at 15, right? You know how to make decisions, but things are a challenge in different dynamics there. But overcome that. The issue was overcoming all of those issues, the trauma, how it affects your mind, your perspective, how it affects your perspective of relationships, your ability to trust. And then I got married at 18 years old. So, but it was a tough situation. I didn't talk about the what happened to me as a kid, and until about 6 months before my first child was born, because I felt like in order to be a good dad, a better man, get rid of the hate and unforgiveness in my heart, because I hated this dude, man. I hated him. I wanted to take him out. I hated him. And there was so much hate. It was killing me. It was destroying me. And so I started dealing with it. And I think it'll be something I deal with for the rest of my life. And I hope that I can help other people get set free from stuff that got hid away.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I know you've shared that with a lot of people. And just the fact that people see you as a successful person, as a successful author, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit, but the things you've been able to accomplish when you have that in your past. But to kind of go back, because I want to kind of peel back the onion a little bit on, when you're a little kid, you probably had this internal sense that what was happening wasn't right. But again, you're little, you don't really know how to process this. Your brain's not, very developed yet. But as you move into your teenage years, how did your feelings towards what you suffered as a child change and alter, and not necessarily in light of what you experienced, as a 15-year-old, but how did you, because you still weren't talking about it at this point, but how did your feelings about it change?
I think we have an ability to block out certain things in our mind. We have an ability to suppress. My feelings of that, it was hate that grew and grew and grew and festered and grew. Pure hatred for what happened to me. And I never wanted anybody else to feel that pain. So, my number one dream as a 17, 18-year-old kid, even 16 really, was to join the Marine Corps. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to join the Marines, get a college degree, become a lawyer, retire as an old Marine. And that's what I wanted to do. My feelings about that never changed. I hated that dude, man. I hated him. I wanted him dead. I wanted him off the map. I knew that as I got older into adulthood, I knew he had kids, and I was concerned that he was treating his kids the same way. And I just had some intuition, some sort of gut feelings that was going on, and it just my hate never went away for him. My hate never went away for him, but I tried to block it out because it was sort of like if you cut your arm as a kid, you not all boys run to their mamas. Some of them want to tape it up and put some dirt on it and move on. Hey, I'm good. Don't bother me. And, it was just pure shame, man, pure shame. And between the shame, the action itself, there was hate there for that. And then the shame sort of caused that hate to grow exponentially. And I know people that are dealing with it today in their 50s and 60s that have never addressed it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the shame piece, because you hear that is a common through point when you talk to people that are victims of childhood sexual abuse, or really sexual abuse of any kind, is the amount of shame. And that shame is really what leads them to not share, because, I've talked about on this podcast before that shame is a powerful tool when used appropriately. Because like if you've got a buddy who says, hey man, I'm going to be on a diet and keep me accountable, and a week later he's not running anymore and he's eating only Cheetos. It's like you can shame that guy into doing some pretty positive things for himself. But kind of explain for us, because luckily this is not something I've ever had to deal with, but I know that there are guys in our audience that have dealt with this, that maybe haven't come out on the other side like you have. But how were you able to process the shame that you were feeling? And even if you could just give us a little bit of insight into what that shame did to you and how debilitating it was.
Yeah, it screwed me up as far as my prospective relationships. I really sort of kept a distance with anybody that was a male figure, anybody, and that wasn't fair to them. But that's just how I dealt with it, and shame caused me to feel unworthy, not good enough, unlovable, and that I was just filthy. I wasn't worth anything. But how I dealt with it was understanding that, man, God loves me, and there's nothing that I could do or anything that could be done to me to change that love. But I'll be honest, the first time I went to God and I talked to a few people in my life about it, and I went to God and I said, hey, I hate this dude. And this is pure hatred, and I don't know how to deal with this, but I need you to help me. And so it was a process. It wasn't something that, hey, I forgive him and move on. I had to say that daily. I had to get up and say, I forgive him, and I want to release all the negative emotions. And I had some deep hatred for him, but it was really walking in faith. You know, we talk a lot about forgiveness. And a lot of guys I've talked to on this topic have said, you know, I'll never forgive so-and-so for what they did to me, whether it was that or you know, or murdering somebody they loved. I'll never forgive them. Well, the forgiveness was killing me. It wasn't harming the guy who did this to me. It was killing me. And so I was being hit multiple times, not only by the actions that happened as a kid, not only by the shame, but now the unforgiveness. So it's stacking up the burdens that I'm carrying around, instead of laying them down at the feet of the one who could take it all and make all things new. And that's what he did. It was just a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It may take a month, it may take 6 months, it may take a year. I don't know. It may take longer than that. But for me, it required me to take a step of faith and out of a position of obedience to God, trusting that he would take care of it, and he did.
I think that's a great word there. And I'd feel remiss if I didn't feel in the last just few minutes hearing you talk, I feel even God telling me that, guys, if you are struggling with feelings like this, you've got my contact information. I'm going to make sure that you have Adam's. Like, tell us, like, we're just guys that are, you know, playing out of your headphones or playing in the speakers of your car. Let us know. And you know, unfortunately, I guess fortunately and unfortunately, I've had people that have reached out to me before on this podcast that don't know me to share some of the things that they've dealt with. And that's the thing, is getting it out there. It can't grow if it's in the light. And that's where God does his best work, and God's in complete control. And I think that's a great word there. A slight transition from kind of what you've experienced. There's more guys that are kind of in our world, like guys that focus on trying to be a sheepdog and trying to be a defender of you know, people that can't really defend themselves. How do you think your expertise in the stuff that you've done in your career, but also what you've experienced as a child, kind of lends itself to you helping with child sex trafficking or just getting the word out about things like that? Because I know that's not a huge part of what you do, Adam, but I know that it's something that is important to you, and it's becoming very, very important to a lot of guys that are either in or out or retired from the law enforcement or military world. So kind of give us a sense of your thoughts on that and what guys like us can do to help.
Yeah. So understanding that there's a behavior of a predator, and that they're not always just going to show up and commit an act. It seldom happens that way. It happens through grooming. It's a complex process, oftentimes, where they have somebody that they are close with, and a lot of this, it may be even subconsciously occurring, where they're developing relationships with people, and they're getting them accustomed to certain behaviors, certain touches, certain things that would be considered inappropriate, but because of their conversations and the way they're leading them and they're grooming them. So you understand that this could be your neighbor, that this could be a family member, this could be somebody within your church, this could be somebody that lives close to you. This is absolutely, you have to look for the signs. You have to look for what's going on. And there's certain non-negotiables, right? We don't have, guys shouldn't, small kids shouldn't be spending the night with certain people. I don't allow my kids to spend the night with anybody. We don't have sleepovers. We don't do those kind of things. And maybe that's overprotective, but looking for the signs and looking for the sort of the red flags of these conversations. There should be no reason a grown adult is talking to a teenager without my consent, without me knowing everything that's going on. And if you're a parent, you need to be all up in your kid's business. And that was one of the issues on my end. My parents, my mother wasn't all up in my business. And when I brought it to their attention, she brushed it off. And so that brought up another whole issue that I had to deal with. And so I could go into great detail, graphic detail, explicit detail, and tell you everything that happened when I was 5 and 15. And I feel like we have to be willing to listen to our children, to look for the signs, to pay attention. It's not being hypervigilant. We live in a day and age where literally the enemy is roaming, looking to kill, steal, and destroy. And he starts with the lives of children. If he can destroy the innocence of a child, he can destroy their destiny. He can rob them of their future. And it's our job as sheepdogs to step in and look for these things, not only in the workplace, not only in school, but within churches. Predators abide within church walls. And we have to be willing to address it and have the testicular fortitude to stand up to them and say, not on our watch, you're not doing this to ours.
And that's the thing I feel like that's not a message, Adam, that you get from the pulpit, unfortunately. I mean, you're going to sit in a lot of churches, and there's a lot of guys sitting here right now that you've sat in the pews or you've sat in the cushy chairs and you've done the up-down thing at the Catholic Church and you've done the yeah, sure, whatever at the Baptist Church, but you're not hearing this from the pulpit. You're hearing it from guys like us. You're hearing it from guys that have this experience. And, everyone knows this, see something, say something, right? Everyone knows that, and everyone's heard of that before. But then how many guys just go, they know what their gut's telling them. They know maybe what the Holy Spirit's telling them, but they're like, that's too much trouble to try to get into. Because the worst case scenario for some of these guys is that you're going to have to eat a little bit of crow. Maybe you challenge somebody, maybe you ask them a very direct question, and then you have to kind of go back and say, hey man, I was just being vigilant for my children. But so many parents now seem to be focused on being buddies with their kids and not wanting to interfere in their social lives and all that. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, these are your children. Like, until they're out of your house, they're in your care, and you're going to have to answer for how you've cared for them. So why do you think that, just to kind of even go back to my initial thing before I went off on a diatribe, why aren't more pastors talking in the way that you talk or in the way that I talk about issues like this? Where are the sheepdog pastors?
Well, I'll answer it in a roundabout way here. One of the reasons is because I feel like they're ruled by fear and not by faith. They're on a mission to give us 5 points to overcome something, to deal with something, to get a better life. Most are afraid of giving us the word rightly divided because they're afraid that somebody's going to walk out on them, and they're going to take a big check. And it's just one of the same reasons. Listen, it's not popular. This isn't popular. This isn't going to get you 1 million clicks on YouTube. This isn't going to get you 1,000 shares on social media. But let me tell you what will. Let me tell you what matters. I call pastors. I've talked to 500 in the past 5 weeks, probably more. And I call them and I say, how's your prison ministry? And they tell me it's going great. I ask them how their ministry to first responders is going. They don't have a clue what I'm talking about. It's the same reason. They don't know how to address sheepdogs. And if you don't know how to address sheepdogs, you don't know how to address the wolf. And if you don't know how to address either of those issues, you stay on the superficial, fluffy, surface level milk. You're talking about milk. We can't grow as a body because we can't get past negotiating with sin. And until we quit negotiating with sin, we're not going to become true sheepdogs. We're not going to be able to address the wolf. And he's going to continue to take more territory and dominate like he's doing in the world today. That's what you have. You have a perspective that Christian men are sissies, that they're weak, and that they're passive. And a lot of them have been. And it's time to grow a backbone and stand up to the threats that are in the world today and be godly men. Drag up your sword, drag up your shield, and go to war for your family. Go to war for other people who can't go to war for themselves. And the reason the world is where it is now is because the body of Christ, the men that were called to be courageous and stand up and fight, they've been passive. They've been quiet. Let me tell you something. Faith doesn't make you weak. It makes you unbeatable. When you have faith from the right source, you become unbeatable. And if you're unbeatable, you remain undefeated. And where are the men that are willing to stand up and say, Semper Invictus? I will be undefeated, always undefeated because of my faith in Christ. And I will go to war for those who can't fight for themselves.
Well, I certainly appreciate that message. And you got a lot of guys listening to this right now that are saying amen, amen, and amen. And I think this is a great time to transition. And we'll get into kind of the stuff with law enforcement and your stuff on marriage here in a little bit. But I just want to talk about overall how to be a sheepdog and be a Christian, the spiritual life and faith. And guys on this podcast will recognize another name, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He was on this podcast a few months ago. And we talked about a new book that y'all co-wrote together on spiritual combat, 30 missions for victorious warfare. And so just kind of give us an idea as to why you and Dave wanted to write this book specifically, and kind of
Yeah.
even just the impact that you've seen it have on the types of guys that you just mentioned talking about just a second ago.
Yep. Well, primarily the reason we needed to put it together is we felt same thing for Bulletproof Marriage. We felt like there's a missing element. There's a void in the community of men and women who are willing to stand up to the enemy. And there's a void of something to address those specific dynamics. And we have both Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman and I have taken calls from men and women who said, how do I pray? How do I study the Bible? How do I do these things? So we put together an essential basic training manual, essentially is what it is, on how to go to war in the spirit. We have everything we need to do battle in the physical, but we neglect the spirit man. And that's why we continue to fail in the physical. You can't win. You can't win unless you win that battle internally first. And once you win that battle internally, then you can take on any enemy in the world. But we wrote it because we felt like there was so many people had taken this book on combat, and there'd been so much success for that book. We wanted to take that book and turn it into a guide, a manual that men and women could take and arm themselves spiritually so that they could go to war in the things that matter.
Well, and with that in mind, why do you think most guys are really kind of cleaving to the books that he's written before, and to even a book like this that is about combat, but more in the spiritual realm? Why do you think most guys are thirsting for that?
Because there's a lack of it. They're hungry. They're hungry for something that's not fluff. They're hungry for something that goes deep and takes them and teaches them what is not being taught in a lot of places. I mean, let's just be honest. Who's gonna tell you, without being weird and wacky with some left field theology, how to deal with spiritual warfare? You know what I'm saying? Listen, it is more real than what you can see, feel, touch, taste, hear, smell right now. It is more real what goes on in the spirit. So they're hungering for that because it's real. You know, if it's the same thing with Bulletproof Marriage, it's real. It's talking about real stuff. It's hitting them right there in the middle of their life. And when they open it up and they read those words, they're able to see how this applies to them and how it's been real in their life from day one. And it's removing some of the masks that have been put over our eyes, and correcting some perspective about the issue.
Well, you keep using the word real there, and I just got to be honest. I was a guy that didn't grow up in church. I grew up in Oklahoma, so I was kind of a believer in God by default, right? Because of where I was born, like that kind of a deal. And a lot of people have that. And so when I started going to church, like they didn't really talk about spiritual warfare. It was kind of mentioned as they were kind of, they were just glazing over it as they were going through certain parts of the Bible, but it definitely wasn't gone into in a fairly extreme degree. And then, yes, there are those kind of more wacky folks that do the, down by the river revivals, and all they talk about is spiritual warfare. And you're like, okay, there's got to be somebody in the middle that's going to talk about this in a way that's not only palatable, but that actually makes sense theologically. Why aren't more churches? And it's got to be bigger than just that. It's kind of weird, because that's everyone's kind of canned answer. Oh, it's kind of weird. That's why they don't talk about it. But if I were to venture a guess, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, my guess is that this is Satan at work inside our church by making these pastors too scared to even talk about spiritual warfare. Because it's like, if it seems real, then people are going to start fighting the battle. Because it's like, yeah, you can prepare all day for, the off chance that the neighborhood across from yours is going to try to attack you and your people in your neighborhood. But that's not a real scenario. But if it's another country, and they hate you, and they hate you just because of your belief system or what you're founded on, yes, it's real. You really need to prepare for it. So do you think it's Satan that's like just trying to do a very unique way of silencing the pastorate, or am I off in left field myself?
No, I think I think you hit the nail on the head. Let's go back and listen. His strategies haven't changed. The strategies of the enemy haven't changed. You go back and look in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had it perfect, man. They had it perfect. They had the perfect world, perfect relationship, had everything they needed. And how did Satan come in? He came in as a serpent with subtle suggestions, just to create a moment of doubt, just a glimmer of doubt, and question what God had told Adam and Eve directly. And if he can go into a place that was completely perfect with God's presence, why can't he come into our world? This isn't the Garden of Eden by a long shot. This is a fallen world. We know that this world is run by him. So I think that it's been a lot of, they've been, subtly seduced by comfort, seduced by apathy, by laziness, by fear. And it doesn't just come and hit you in the face. It's just like what we talked about when we started off at the top of the interview. A predator is not going to just walk in most cases, and commit some kind of sexual crime against a child or an adult. It's going to become, they come in and they start to create that relationship. So we've created a relationship with comfort. We've created a relationship with everything but what matters most, and that's a relationship with the Creator, with the true voice of hope, with the one who spoke and everything became. We have become so comfortable in dealing with things that don't stretch us, that don't cause us to grow, that don't challenge us. We don't want to deal with that. We don't want the blowback that comes off of that. And so, yeah, I feel like you're spot on saying, hey, the enemy he's got us snowed under. And what are we going to do to change this? What are we going to do to remove the blinders? And we have to take a step out of that comfort zone.
Yeah, and Adam, you use a great word. You use the word subtle, because everyone's worried about the tornado that's going to take their house right off the foundation, but they're not worried about the slow decay from the inside of like termites or like a water leak.
Yeah.
People aren't as worried about that. That's not as sexy. It's not as, dramatic or as exciting, but it's those little things that can rot you away from the inside. When you talk about these predators, it's those little things that they just do here or there. And it's those little subtle things that they do. And again, Satan does like to introduce doubt. And even we were talking on other podcasts with other people, it's just these little doubtful statements that are in the back of your mind that aren't coming from God. You can't put it through a filter and know that it's coming from God because it's coming from the enemy. And he's telling you, you're not good enough to do this. Like, yes, you're dirty. No, you're not worthy. Like all those different things. And it affects you not only in your spiritual life, but it affects you in all your relationships. And before we move on to how that will kind of affect a marriage, before we leave this macro topic of your spiritual life and spiritual faith and really spiritual combat, we talk about spiritual resilience all the time. Physical, mental, and spiritual resilience is what we talk about all the time. But with spiritual resilience, the ability to bounce back, not just be strong, but the ability to bounce back when you've been knocked down. From your perspective, what are some of the things practically that men listening to this can do to really gird their loins for the battle and to create that spiritual resilience?
Know what you believe. Most men don't fight for anything because they don't know what they believe. And if you know what you believe, you develop a core of beliefs based on the scripture. Know what you believe. You'll be willing to fight for it. You'll be more apt to fight for it. Know what you believe. You can know that by studying his word. Further, have a solid prayer life. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have this big ceremony every day, but develop a spirit of prayer where you are in a constant state of prayer. That it may not be eloquent words. It may, and the way I do it is a conversation with God. It's just, and which he doesn't talk back, but is I'm talking to him conversationally, okay, and talk to him like a friend, because he said, "Come to me with childlike faith, come to me boldly," and so leave the religious, eloquent, complex words out of the conversation and talk to him like we're talking. He listens. And so have that solid prayer life. Know what you believe. Have a solid prayer life. Study the word. You can't you can't know what you believe until you study the word. And have that time studying his word daily. One of the greatest resources I got. My wife and I just celebrated 20 years of marriage last week. She gifted me with the Tony Evans Bible commentary. It's one of the absolute best commentaries I've seen. And get you something like the Tony Evans Bible commentary so you can dive deeper into the word and study it. Have a plan. Know his word. I have a problem memorizing things. I have a memory issue, but this helps me to be able to retain it and tie it into a way that I can pull up that scripture whenever I need it. So know what you believe. Have a solid prayer life. Have a sort of a discipline to study his word, and have men around you that are godly men. Have somebody around you that has gone before you in life, that they're further along than you are. They've got more experience, and then have a man that you can help bring up. That's the way we see it in the scripture. We are called to make disciples. So be discipled and make disciples. And if you stay busy and you have those goals and you have those sort of disciplines in your life, then you'll have a battle plan in place to bounce back from anything that you face. Know what you believe. That's most important. Know what you believe.
Well, there you go, guys. Those are definitely words to live by, and you've certainly heard me say things like that before. And this is the wisdom that you need to live by, and this is the way that you get the plans to where you can end up in a place that you want to be. And one thing that you've mentioned, or you mentioned it several times throughout this podcast, you've mentioned your marriage, you mentioned Bulletproof Marriage, but obviously you and Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, you wrote Bulletproof Marriage, a 90-day devotional, and that was released not that long ago, and it's had a tremendous impact on a lot of people. But for you, why was it important for you to put some of your thoughts, because they weren't necessarily in the area of marriage initially, but for both of you to spend the time to dedicate to the subject of marriage?
It comes out of a place of need. We listen to our readers. We listen to the people who attend our events. We pay attention to the conversations and some of the core problems that are going on in the lives of sheepdogs. But I didn't want to waste my own pain. That's a topic for a whole nother conversation, is the early years of my marriage and my marriage during law enforcement. Is I didn't want to waste the pain. I didn't want to waste the mistakes. I didn't want to waste the lessons I learned from the sins I committed. And I wanted to be able to take those lessons and turn them into something that would set other people free. And I know that in the process of me growing and finding healing and being set free, I learned that I wasn't the only one dealing with these issues that you'll read within Bulletproof Marriage. I wasn't the only one. And so when I wrote it, I got a lot of feedback. These folks are like, hey, how'd you know what was going on in my family? How'd you know what's going on within the four walls of my home? I'm like, because you're not the only one, dude. You're not the only one going through this. And so it really come from a place of need. And because there was nothing else on the market specifically for first responders and military couples. And so we wanted to provide a powerful resource, and it's done a lot. I mean, we've got an online course that you can go through for 7 weeks. Shake off the apathy and laziness. So many couples are lazy in their approach to their marriage. And then one day wake up and they say, well, where did we go wrong? What happened? Where did it fall apart? That's because you were lazy. You were apathetic about the issues. You let the enemy come in. He snuck in, started planting those seeds. So it sort of sharpens you. It's a 90-day challenge. I look at it like sort of a boot camp. We go to training. Police academies typically 3 months in a lot of places. Most of your basic training for military is about 3 months, but we often fail to train on how we can have the best marriage possible. We're willing to just survive it instead of having a thriving one. So I could talk a whole nother hour on that, but I'll leave it there with you.
Hey, maybe one of these days down the line, we'll just do one on marriage, but I do want to ask a follow-up even on that, because obviously for my wife and I, we've been married for 11 years, and a lot of couples don't even get to that point. And we've had our knockdown drag-outs, and we've had our bad and dark moments, but there seems to be this overwhelming sense that marriage, you hear people say it, but it's kind of true. Marriage isn't what it used to be, right? Because you heard from these families, if you maybe talk to your parents' generation or grandparents' generation, like divorce was a word that wasn't even used. It was this thing that even culturally, divorce had this negative connotation around it. But now it's just kind of like, it's just kind of a thing that happens. It's like, oh, well, my first and second and third marriages didn't go great, but this fourth one's going well for now. And it's like people are practicing divorce even when they're living together before marriage. There's a lot of things that are going on within the issue of marriage. Why do you think it's gotten to the point that it is now? Is it just the fact that we're in a more secular culture than we maybe ever have been in the history of our country, or is it maybe something deeper?
I think it's something deeper. I think it's something broader. And you have to look at the decay, the moral decay in our society. You have to look at what we've been willing to negotiate with and compromise with instead of holding true to what we believe. My wife and I got married at 18 years old. We graduated in May. We're married in September, and it was hell. I was rough, hard to love. I mean, we were kids, but to sit here today and be celebrating 20 years and be in a better place than we've ever been, is a testament to God's word and the truths of his word, the principles that we learn from his word, and having that commitment. I think a lot of times we are only committed when it's comfortable. We're only committed when it's convenient. We're only committed when there's something in it for us. And when you remove the benefits that we could get, when you remove the convenience and the comfort, we no longer want to be committed. And we don't want to work for it. We don't want to fight for it. We don't want to shake off the laziness. We'll just brush it off and be passive about it. And that's just something that's occurred in our society over time that says, hey, it's okay. It's okay. It happens. It's okay. No, you know what? It's not okay. Be willing to stand up and fight for your marriage. Well, my wife cheated on me. My husband cheated on me. Okay, let's deal with it. Now, if there's abuse, then whole nother conversation, whole nother path. We got to have another conversation. God did not say stay committed, stay married, so you can stay abused. That's not the case. And he even gives us an out on adultery. But what are we going to fight for? If you start your relationship saying I'll love you forever, unless you've already completely devalued your love, you got to be willing to fight for it. And if we love selflessly, like Jesus loves us selflessly, then we could have better marriages. But we're selfish, we're apathetic, we're lazy. We want somebody to give us a book. I've got a lot of people that bought the course, a lot of folks that bought the course that didn't even start it because
Right.
There's some kind of good feeling that happens when you say, oh, I bought this course for us, honey. We're going to go through this course and never do it. Now it feels good. We ain't got to do it. So we just buy it. It's like a magic pill that's going to make it better for us. It's like the same people who want to lose weight. There's not a magic pill to help you lose weight. Put in the work, be disciplined, be committed, fight for it. And if you want the best one, fight for it. Because I promise you this, the same habits that you have in this one are going to follow you in the next one. And if you don't fight for it now, next one's not going to be any better.
Well, and here's the thing about that is what a lot of people do, Adam, I feel like, is they think that movement is action. They think that movement is putting them in a certain direction. So it's like people that buy running shoes because they're going to get in shape and then they never take them out of the box. It's like they've done something. They can point to the thing that they've done. But I want to take it even a step further before we move off the subject of marriage. And guys, it's not just fighting for your marriage. It's fighting for the marriage of the guys that are in your foxhole. I always talk about foxhole guys here, might be called your band of brothers or whatever you call it, but it's your group of dudes, your 3 a.m. friends. It's fighting for their marriages as well, because I've put a lot of relational chips in the center, and I put a lot of my chips at risk with friends and had some tough conversations because they were just ready to very easily and quickly and quietly bow out of their marriages and, leave their kids high and dry and leave their spouses. And for a myriad of different circumstances, sometimes it was them that, screwed up. Sometimes it was the wife that screwed up. Sometimes it was both. But the thing is, guys, is if they're not willing to fight for their marriage, that's when it's your opportunity to hop in and help them, to smack them around a little bit and say, you are going to regret this for the rest of your life. Let's fast forward 30 years from now. You don't want to look back at this moment and see that you were a pussy instead of a strong man. That's not what you want to end up doing. And so again, I know I get like fired up about this because guys aren't willing to fight for their own marriages, but also don't just look around at your own. Look around and help shoulder the burdens for some of the other guys that you're into, or some of the other guys that you're in their lives with them and helping them on a day-to-day basis. That's another way that you can help strengthen what you've got going on your side. But I'd be remiss if we went through an entire conversation with you, Adam, and didn't talk about law enforcement, because you are a tremendous influence in the world of law enforcement. You wrote a book called Behind the Badge, 365 Daily Devotions for Law Enforcement. And I just got to tell you, I've got a lot of friends that are in law enforcement, a lot of folks that I really respect, and those guys are getting hit from every angle right now, guys and gals, and they're not getting the respect that they should very much so deserve. But take us through the whole process. You're a former guy in law enforcement. You left law enforcement just a few years ago. But why did you write Behind the Badge, and what type of impact are you seeing with that?
I wrote Behind the Badge because I remember my darkest hour as a cop. I couldn't find anything that hit me between the eyes. There was awesome resources by chaplains, not knocking any of it, but when I went to search for something, I couldn't find something that spoke to me where I was at. And I wrote Behind the Badge. I'll never forget. I'd gotten to a place where I was drinking pretty much every night, and I was pretty messed up. I'd come home, my wife would say, "How was your day?" Fine. Take off my gear and be silent. Didn't want to talk. Completely isolated. And I remember where I was at. I remember ready to take my own life. I remember the day I wanted to take my own life. And I remember the supervisor who told me when I quit drinking, I quit running, and doing all the crap I was doing and running with the circle. He said, you just be better off go kill yourself. We'd be better off if you just go kill yourself. And so I wanted to write it to the hard-hearted Adam. I wanted to write it to the guy who used to be so hard-hearted and cold and cynical. I wanted to write it to that guy. And I figured if I could write it and get through to that guy, I could reach any officer, any law enforcement officer in America. And I wanted to provide them something, every day. Every day you have a routine. You have certain things that you have to do in law enforcement. One of the things we fail to do, we got great physical training requirements. We got great requirements and training for the skills that are necessary, the craft, the tools. But we fail to take care of our soul, of our heart, of our mind, of our spirit man. And so I wanted to provide something that was going to be that daily nourishment. It was never written with an intention to be the one-all, be-all resource for law enforcement. This was created to spark a hunger and an appetite for the things of God, to show you that faith doesn't make you weak, it makes you unbeatable. Because that's how I saw it. I saw it as a cop, that faith made me passive, made me weak. But then I realized that there's a way that I can be strong, that he makes me stronger. He makes me strong. Without him, I'm not strong. I'm fake. And when I have him, I become unbeatable. And so, he's given us the authority. He's given us the power, and he's given us all the tools needed. And when we have that peace, when we have the perfect peace that comes from him, man, it changes everything. It changes our perspective of the job, of our families, of the work we're doing, and it empowers us to be better sheepdogs.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that sentiment. And the thing is these people have taken an oath, and they've gone through everything they need to go through in order to set themselves up to be a sheepdog, to protect people that maybe don't even like them. So what would you say to any law enforcement? We have quite a bit that listen to this podcast, a lot of first responders that listen to this. What would you say to them right now when every time they turn on the television, it's people in the streets setting stuff on fire, saying how much they hate cops, how all cops are racist, on the hunt to find a black person to kill, or whatever these people say, defund the police? What would you say to these people that every day they wake up early, they get on their gear, and they head out to go and protect the populace that maybe doesn't even like them?
You answered a calling. And nobody said the calling would be easy. Matter of fact, you knew it wouldn't be easy when you said, yes, send me, I'll go. You knew it wouldn't be easy. You've been through battles before. You've been through hell before. You've been through the fire. This is just another test. This will pass. This will pass. But you got to be willing to stand. And if you want to make it through the fire, you have to be willing to walk through the fire with the one who created fire. And if you're willing to be walking through it with him, he'll bring you out the other side. Don't allow the negative circumstances outside of what you're doing and what he's called you to do to affect your perspective of what he's called you to do. Focus on what he's called you to do. Focus on your assignment. Focus on your job. And those that you serve with, shoulder to shoulder, help lift another up. When you defeat your demons, don't lay down your sword and shield. Go fight for somebody else. Help them. This requires all hands on deck. Where we're at in our world right now requires every hand, every person at their best. This is what we were trained for. This is why we were made, for such a time as this. The time of peace and the time when everything's good, that's awesome. This is why we were put here. This is why we were created. This is the time for the sheepdog to rise. This is time for the men and women who have courage, who love Christ, who have his love living in them, who are following the lead of the great shepherd. This is the time for you to rise to the surface. Everybody else, they have to answer for it themselves. But you fight. You stand and fight, and you hold your ground.
Well, that is a good word, Adam. We have covered a lot of different subjects, but before we let you go for the day, one thing that we like to do at the end of our interviews is we like to do a segment called, What Would You Say to Someone That Said? And then I'm just going to fill in the blanks. But here's the deal, is these are going to be big topics, a lot of these, but you got 30 seconds to answer. So it is meat and potatoes. It is lightning round. So you got to cut out all the fluff, all the stuff that makes it easier for people to digest it. Nope, we just need the meat and potatoes. What would you say to someone that said? So you up for it?
Yep, let's roll.
All right, let's do it. First one here. What would you say to someone that said, we should defund the police?
I would say you're a complete idiot. You have no knowledge of how government works. You have no knowledge of how law enforcement works. And you're basically following the crowd. Stop following the crowd and be a leader. Be the one who gets out there and does something about it. If you want to defund the police, start by defunding politicians. Start by defunding those who support defunding police. It means that nobody's going to come to your house when somebody's got a gun to your face. Nobody's going to respond to your rape. Nobody's going to respond to the robbery, to the burglary, to the murder, to the rape. Nobody's going to be there for that. If you want to defund police, I ask you honestly, please take a search at who you are, what you believe, what you stand for, and why you believe that. And sit down, and at the end of the day, if it makes sense for you, I mean, hey, believe what you want to believe. But at the end of the day, no cops means no peace.
All right. Next rapid fire question here. What would you say to someone that said, I want my kids to be in law enforcement?
I would say raise them up right then. If you want them to be in law enforcement, ask them why. And then help nurture and develop the characteristics, because you have a young sheepdog. And you've been given a great opportunity to raise a sheepdog. And that's what we need. The world needs great sheepdogs. I wouldn't say discourage them from it. I talk to a lot of people all the time about it. If you want to be in law enforcement, law enforcement needs men and women like you. Then if you have a child that wants to be that way, nurture them, develop the characteristics, be there for them, raise them, teach them what it means.
All right, next one here. What would you say to someone that said, I don't want my kids to be in law enforcement?
Then I'd say that, check why you don't want your kids to be in law enforcement. I think that's pretty realistic. I think it's pretty common. I think it's pretty understandable. Who would want to willingly send, other than God himself, willingly send his son to die for us? Who would be willing to send their kid into an environment like law enforcement is right now? But at the same time, ask yourself, why are you afraid? If you're afraid, is your child afraid? That's a totally different conversation. Ask yourself why you don't want your kid to go into law enforcement.
All right, next one here. What would you say to someone that said, pornography feeds child sex trafficking?
I would say you're 100% correct. We need to completely defund pornography. It should be totally shut down and taken off the market, locked down, and completely unplugged. Take it away. We could restore a little bit morality in our society if we get rid of that garbage.
You're not going to hear an argument from me on that. All right, next one. What would you say to someone that said, I can't tell anyone about the abuse that I've suffered?
I'd say you're letting shame and pain speak for you. It takes a lot of courage to talk about it. I get it. But the reason I started talking about it is after the first few times I did, I saw that it set people free. And I'm willing to lay mine on the table for somebody else to be set free. You don't understand what kind of healing awaits for you on the other side if you're willing to have the courage, have the balls to talk about it. I'm saying, I'm not going to trash you for not talking about it, but I'm saying have a little courage. Let's see what waits on the other side. You're going to find a whole other world, a whole better life when you get rid of that garbage that's on the inside, all that hate, bitterness, and resentment. It's going to set you free.
Next one here. What would you say to someone that said, it doesn't matter if you check out other women, you're just looking?
I say that's a cop-out. It's a cheap way of starting your negotiation with adultery, with pornography, with lust, with sin. And Jesus told us that if you look at another woman with lust, you may as well just sleep with her. Stop negotiating. Stop compromising. Draw a hard line in the sand and say, this is what I believe, and I'm not going to go beyond it. Hold your line. Stand for what you believe. Stop negotiating and compromising.
All right, next one here. Just a couple left. What would you say to someone that said, my marriage can't be salvaged?
Mine couldn't either, but God works in miraculous and mysterious ways. I feel like that if you put a defining factor on that, then you're putting God in a box. Have you taken it to him yet? If you take it to him and he gives you other instructions, then okay. But if you haven't given him a chance yet, if both of you haven't given him a chance yet, if you haven't truly fought for it, don't tell me you can't save it.
All right, last question of the day, Adam. What would you say to someone that said, there's no such thing as the spiritual battle between good and evil?
I would say you haven't experienced it. You haven't researched it. You haven't studied it. You've stayed on the surface level of living. When you go deep, when you understand that this life will end, when you understand what awaits us in eternity, then go and do the research yourself. Just take a chance. Hey, at the end of the day, if I'm wrong, what do I have to lose? What do you have to lose? Go and look for yourself, research for yourself, study for yourself, and one day you'll discover it. Whether it's now or whether it's later, discover it now so your later can be better.
Hey, Adam, that is a great way to end this. And we've talked about a lot of different subjects. And man, I appreciate all of your time, but that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Hey, you know what? I don't know where you're at right now. I don't know what you're going through. I know a lot of people are going through some hard stuff right now. But keep fighting. Keep fighting. And for those of you that are experiencing victory, that you've like I said earlier, you've already beat your demons, you've already beat your battles. Don't sit down and prop your feet up. There's a lot of folks beside you that love and care. Hey, listen out. Look out for your brother. Help your brother. Don't be willing to call your brother out when they're doing something stupid, because we need each other. We're better together. Don't allow isolation to lead you into defeat. We need each other. Find a way to keep united, stay together, fight for what you believe. Fight for what you believe, because we know that it is very clear the enemy will fight for what they believe. Stand up, righteous men, and fight for what you believe in.
All right. Adam Davis, thanks for coming on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Kyle, thank you so much, brother.
All right, there you go, guys. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate you guys checking out this episode that we did with Adam. Man, that was a lot of fun for us. We went and talked about a lot of different things. And the funny thing about this interview is we didn't hit on some of the subjects that I wanted to. We did not go in the order that I thought that we would go. But as per usual, it went way better than I ever thought it could have even gone. And I just really, really enjoyed my time with him. But before we let you guys go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. As you know by now, we are a men's ministry, and our mission is cultivating manly resilience. Specifically, we do that by providing content like this podcast that helps you forge spiritual, mental, and physical toughness. So the two resources I've got for you today, I've got Adam Davis's website, and then I've got his Amazon page. And so if anything that you heard today was of interest to you, any of the books, go to the Amazon page. You'll be able to find the books there. If you're interested in his courses or even getting in touch with him, he also wanted me to give you his email address. So it's just info@theadamdavis.com. That's info@theadamdavis.com. Guys, we talked off air about this, and we're serious about this. We talked about child abuse. We talked about sexual abuse in this episode. So if this is something that you've struggled with personally, we don't want you to feel like you're alone. Okay, we're just a couple of guys, right? He has experienced this personally. I have not, but we have both seen people through this process and helped them out. And so if that has affected you, I would encourage you to reach out to him. Again, info@theadamdavis.com. And my email is just info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the episode. We really do appreciate it. If you would, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher, and refer your friends to listen and share this on social media. Guys, if we deserve a 5-star review, please leave us 5 stars and a few sentences letting us know why you like the content. I'm currently booking speaking engagements for the remainder of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So if you want me to come speak on your podcast, at your men's event, at your church, at your team, hit me up, info@Undaunted.Life. Again, the email is info@Undaunted.Life. The website is www.Undaunted.Life. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter @Undaunted.Life and Facebook.com/Undaunted.Life. Check out our free devotionals on the YouVersion Bible app. Just search Undaunted.Life under plans. And as always, we want to thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their entire music library for our content. The intro-outro track on this podcast is our song Defender, which is off their latest record entitled Guardians. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep cultivating manly resilience, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical toughness, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.